Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Tim Wise. I'm a senior advisor at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and I'll be moderating this panel today on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement corn dispute over GM corn restrictions in Mexico. This panel will focus on the economics, looking at farmers' perspectives. This is the third in the webinar series that have been put on by IATP and produced with Friends of the Earth, Semillas de Vida in Mexico, Farm Action, the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, and ANEC, Mexican Farmer Organization. The first two focused on the science of precaution and rights obligations, but this one will focus on economics and farmer perspectives. Before we get started, let me just do the usual housekeeping. For interpretation, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen in Zoom the interpretation button. And that can allow you to select the language that you would like to hear. If you click the language you'd like to hear, English or Spanish, you can hear if you want to hear the interpreted language only, click mute original audio. Otherwise, you will need the original language. So you will hear the original language softly in the background. Para los en español, los controles del webinario en la barra en la parte inferior de la pantalla, haga clic en el botón interpretación para escoger el idioma. Para oír solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en silenciar audio original. De lo contrario, oirá el idioma original suavemente de fondo. If anyone is having problems with interpretation, please note that in the chat, and our tech support will try to address your question. You'll notice that the chat section is open, but we will not be taking questions and answers at the end of the event through the chat, but only through the Q&A box located again along the bottom panel of the screen. We will get to as many questions as time allows. We have an hour. If journalists are on and have more specific questions for specific panelists, please let us know and stay on at the end. I think panelists could stay around for a short period of time. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on IATP's website within a week. The recordings from the other two, I believe, are both available now and are well worth listening to if you did not get the opportunity. So let's get started. Just by way of background, the Mexican government announced plans to transition away from the imports of GM corn and the use of the herbicide glyphosate shortly after President Andrés Manuel López Obrador took office in 2019. But an initial presidential decree that called for phasing out glyphosate and all imports of GM corn by 2024 was subsequently revised and relaxed considerably. In February 2023, the government, a new decree scaled back the plans, continuing the phase out of glyphosate, eliminating the cultivation of GM corn, but limiting the mandated restrictions on GM corn imports to their use in flour and tortillas for direct human consumption, the intention being to take precautionary measures for public health and for the diversity of native corn. Those restrictions affect only a tiny portion of U.S. exports, mainly white corn. Most exports from the U.S. are GM yellow corn for animal feed. But even though only 2 to 3% of U.S. corn exports to Mexico were affected by the measures, the U.S. launched a formal trade dispute under the U.S-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the revised NAFTA, last August. Now, in the back and forth of documents in the dispute, the U.S. is claiming that its white corn exports have fallen 40% since the decree. Some non-governmental organizations were invited to submit formal comments to the 3-member tribunal hearing the case, including those who spoke in the last 2 webinars. Several of us were not invited to submit comments, including Farm Action, speaking today, and myself on the limited trade impact and the potential value to U.S. farmers of switching to non-GM corn. This webinar will focus on farmer perspectives largely excluded by the trade panel. We are lucky to have with us Ken Roseboro of the non-GMO report. He and I have written about this subject. Angela Huffman of Farm Action, which issued a strong declaration after being denied the right to submit formal comments, and Josefina Rosas of the Mexican farmer organization ANEC, a longtime IATP partner, which did submit formal comments to the trade panel. I will introduce each speaker when they speak in more detail, but let's begin with Ken. Ken Roseboro is the editor of the Organic and Non-GMO Report, which has been around for a long time, since 1999. Ken's articles have appeared in leading food and agriculture publications and websites such as Civil Eats, Sustainable Food News, Prepared Foods, and others. Ken is author of Genetically Altered Foods and Your Health and the Organic Food Handbook, both published by Basic Health Publications. He's a member of the design team of the Soil Climate Alliance and a founding member of the board of directors of the Iowa Organic Association. And he has followed this dispute since the beginning and written quite a bit about it. So he brings a lot of knowledge of farmer perspectives on the possibility of growing non-GM corn for Mexico. So Ken, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Tim. I can't seem to enable my video. Can somebody help me with that? Oh, here we go. Got it. Great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, I've been publishing the Organic and Non-GMO Report since 2001. Been covering the markets for organic, non-GMO grains, ingredients, and foods, particularly focusing on the non-GMO market. Next slide. So this is our publication. It comes out every 2 months. And next slide. We also publish a directory of suppliers of organic, non-GMO grains and ingredients, the Organic and Non-GMO Source Book. This is the only directory of its kind, global directory of suppliers of organic non-GMO products. Next slide. I just want to give an overview of Mexico's white corn imports. So Mexico imports 600,000 tons of white corn each year from the U.S. Half of that is GMO. And white corn imports account for just 1.8% of Mexico's total corn imports from the U.S. Those total imports of corn from the U.S. account for 16.5 million tons. So as Tim said, the U.S. assertion of economic harm to its corn exports because Mexico wants to use non-GMO corn is greatly exaggerated, since white corn exports account for a tiny percentage of total U.S. corn exports to Mexico. Next slide. So, yeah, so for U.S., just giving an overview of U.S. non-GMO corn production. Last year, American farmers grew 6,485,000 acres of non-GMO corn. White corn accounted for 1 million acres. Half of that, 500,000 acres, is non-GMO. So the leading white corn producing states include Nebraska and Texas, with smaller quantities being produced in Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. Next slide. So this shows some suppliers of non-GMO corn, some U.S. Non-GMO corn suppliers. Clarkson Grain, most of these suppliers are in the Midwest. So they'll buy non-GMO corn from farmers, contract farmers to grow non-GMO corn, and then sell that non-GMO corn. So these companies include Clarkson Grain, Healthy Food Ingredients, the Andersons, Schooler, Roby Seed, DeLong Company, Trace Cooperative, and also Cargill and ADM, two large, as we know, grain companies are also supplying non-GMO corn. Next slide. So this is a quote from Lynn Clarkson. He's the CEO of Clarkson Grain, leading U.S. supplier of non-GMO corn. And he said that, "I think the U.S. farmer would be delighted to have a market where they would get paid more by providing an identity-preserved non-GMO crop." So Lynn Clarkson and others in the grain industry that I've interviewed have said that the U.S. could meet, in some cases, easily meet Mexico's demand for non-GMO white and also yellow corn for feed. He estimates that Mexico would need 16 million tons of non-GMO corn, 640 million bushels, which is less than 5% of U.S. corn production. Clarkson said a cooperating network of 20 to 30 grain companies in the Midwest could meet Mexico's demand for non-GMO corn. The challenge in doing this, meeting Mexico's demand, is ensuring that there is enough non-GMO corn seed. And according to Clarkson and others, it would take a couple of years to ramp up the seed supply to make sure that farmers had enough non-GMO corn seed to plant. Next slide. So here are some companies selling non-GMO corn seed. Most of these are in the Midwest. Albert Lee Seed is in Minnesota. Bass Hybrids also in Minnesota. The Dell Seeds actually is in Canada. Hybrid 85 is in Nebraska. Prairie Hybrids is in Illinois. Spectrum Non-GMO is in Indiana. The list also includes Pioneer Hybrid, which is one of the world's largest seed companies. Pioneer Hybrid sells a lot of non-GMO corn seed. Next slide. This is a quote from Mac Earhart, who's the president of Albert Lee Seeds, which supplies organic and non-GMO corn seed. Says, "I have absolutely no doubt the United States could meet Mexico's demand for non-GMO corn. All that's needed is a market signal, and farmers will do it." Next. And a quote from Nate Belcher, co-owner of Hybrid 85, Nebraska-based non-GMO corn seed company. There's a $450 million market in corn going from Nebraska to Mexico. We could fill the non-GMO demand from Nebraska and a good portion of the Midwest as well. Next. So there's a non-GMO opportunity here for U.S. farmers. According to some estimates, U.S. farmers could earn premium prices ranging from 25 cents to 50 cents per bushel for non-GMO white corn. And actually, according to the most recent USDA's non-GMO grain report, premiums are 30 cents to $1 per bushel for non-GMO white corn and 20 cents to 30 cents per bushel for non-GMO feed grade corn. Next. So this is farmer Graham Christensen. He's a farmer in Nebraska. He grows non-GMO corn. There should be a quote there. Yeah, there we go. And Graham said, absolutely, if there's a demand there, let's find ways to partner with Mexico. They're much closer. They're a trade partner. We should make it happen. And Darren Ferr, a farmer in Iowa, says it comes down to what customers, in this case, Mexico, value. He said, if non-GMO is important to that customer, I have no business telling him how much of a fool he is for thinking so. That's just the choice he's made. It's their prerogative and privilege to do it. Next slide. I just wanted to give an overview of the non-GMO project, which is a verification program for non-GMO products. It's a non-GMO standard. It's developed to help food and grain companies avoid GMOs in their products. The standard requires segregation, GMO testing, and traceability. And there are GMO thresholds, 0.25% for seed, 0.9% for food. The 0.9 threshold is a common non-GMO standard, and it's the standard for GMO labeling in Europe. Animal feed, 5%, non-food products, 1.5%. So there are some 65,000 products that are non-GMO project verified, and these are generating $40 billion in sales. So just to summarize, as you can see, there's a strong $40 billion non-GMO market in the US, and non-GMO grain suppliers, seed companies, and farmers would be happy to supply Mexico with non-GMO white and yellow corn. This would create a mutually beneficial relationship instead of the animosity of the current trade dispute. Even though US commodity groups and trade officials would not like to offer that non-GMO opportunity to Mexico, they are ignoring a fundamental principle of business common sense, which is to give the customer what they want. So I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Ken. It's interesting that the latest reports actually show that the premium for non-GM white corn is higher than you and I had looked at than when we looked at it before.
Yeah.
I think the important thing about that's often misrepresented about this case is that Mexico has not closed borders to any imports at all. It has only closed the uses of GM corn in a particular part of the food chain in Mexico that is sensitive to, that they feel is sensitive to the potential risks. And that means that it has always been true that US farmers have the choice, have had the choice to switch to non-GM corn and export to Mexico. No one is preventing them from doing that, which is one of the reasons IATP and others have argued that this is a spurious trade dispute because it doesn't actually restrict trade in a meaningful way. Thanks so much, Ken.
You're welcome.
Next up, I'm pleased to have Angela Huffman with us, president of Farm Action. She brings more than a decade of experience in food and agricultural policy reform and market development. She led numerous institutions, retailers, and food buyers to shift their purchasing toward farms that meet the highest standards for fairness and sustainability. She's held marketing and consulting positions for farms, regional dairy and meat processors, distributors, and restaurants. Her research and analyses are frequently featured in national news media. She holds a BA in English and an MA in Public Policy and Management from the Ohio State University. And she raises registered Katahdin sheep on her family's 200-year-old farm in Northwest Ohio. Farm Action is one of the organizations that requested the permission to submit formal comments and was denied that request by the trade panel. But they made the very strong case that that farmers could benefit from this restriction by doing exactly what Ken was talking about, and she'll tell us more about that now. Angela.
All right, thanks, Tim. I want to start by running through a quick scenario. If you were running a business and your second largest customer told you that rather than continuing to buy your generic lower end product, they want to start buying your top of the line premium product instead. And they're giving you 4 years notice so that you can start ramping up your production. Well, you'd have to be crazy not to jump at an opportunity like that. So why is the US fighting Mexico's transition to higher value non-GM corn? It presents a premium market opportunity to US farmers to make more money. But instead of seizing this opportunity, the US government is promoting the economic interests of transnational seed and chemical companies like Bayer Monsanto, who are really the ones that would lose if Mexico has its way. And this has been our message to the US officials and the panel reviewing the US-Mexico trade dispute. I appreciate the chance to join with all of you today to share our findings on how the US's decision to go to bat for the world's largest seed and chemical companies is negatively impacting America's farmers. Mexico is the second largest importer of US corn. Their 2020 decree announcing the intention to phase out GM corn and glyphosate signaled a tremendous market opportunity for non-GM corn production here in the US. US farmers who already produce non-GM corn report better financial returns, including higher premiums and improved net profits. So here's what it would look like to accept this market opportunity instead of fighting it. To meet Mexico's demand for non-GM white corn for tortillas, we must produce 180,000 acres of non-GM white corn. To put this in perspective, this is just 0.2% of our corn acreage to meet Mexico's demand for flour and tortillas. And based on the current premium farmers make for non-GM corn, our numbers, we had farmers making 25 to 50 cents more per bushel of non-GM corn compared to GM corn. I know Ken had even some higher numbers specifically for the non-GM white corn. But at this rate, transitioning 180,000 acres would generate between $8 to $15 million in additional premiums for US farmers. That's real money in farmers' pockets. And as Ken pointed out, 500,000 acres is already in non-GM corn. So we already produce enough corn to meet the tortilla decree. And what about if Mexico stood by its initial decree that would also phase out GM corn for livestock feed as well? That would be a bigger shift, but it would still be just 3% of our corn production. We grow 90 million total acres of corn in the US, and it would mean shifting 3 million of those acres to non-GM corn. This would bring in $75 to $150 million in premiums for US farmers. So back in 2020, when Mexico announced its intention, the USDA should have begun investing in supply chain infrastructure, technical assistance, seed availability, to ensure that US farmers were prepared to sell into this new market. Instead, the US government has adamantly opposed Mexico's decree, claiming that they're defending US farmers by doing so. But it's our belief that this opposition primarily protects the major seed and agrochemical corporations who would really have the most to lose if a substantial number of American corn farmers were to shift to non-GM production. The group of corporations controlling GM corn, glyphosate, and agrochemical markets is small and very powerful. 4 corporations control 65% of agrochemicals, and just 2 corporations control 70% of all GM corn seed here in the United States. These aren't even US companies that we're defending. They include Germany's Bayer Monsanto, China's Syngenta. These chemical and seed companies have been outspoken about their pressure campaign on the US government to challenge Mexico's ban. This webinar series is called Who Decides on Food Policy? The answer is these chemical and seed companies. Our government already props up these corporate giants with taxpayer money through crop insurance and biofuel investments, but that's not enough for these greedy companies. A transition of 180,000 acres to non-GM corn to meet the tortilla decree would loosen the seed companies' control over those acres and impact their market. And worse for them, should Mexico decide to ban all GM corn, including the yellow feed corn, much more acreage would be planted in non-GM corn, harming their market position even more. When a handful of corporations control our food and agriculture system, their interests come first at the expense of everyone else. The US government is promoting the economic interests of transnational seed and chemical companies and ignoring the premium market opportunity that Mexico's demand for non-GM corn presents to US farmers. We urge you all to join us and the others here in telling the Biden administration to reverse course and support America's farmers in meeting this premium market opportunity. Today, the US has a negative agriculture trade deficit and is ignoring a growing movement to ban GM grains and glyphosate. Mexico is not the first to shift away from GM corn and glyphosate. Dozens of other countries have banned or tried to ban them, including Germany, where glyphosate producer Bayer Monsanto is based. So protecting the world's largest chemical companies and rejecting a growing premium market opportunity for farmers is only going to put us in a worse position in the world's agriculture market. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. I know that, could you say something about the statement that Farm Action made to the when you were denied the opportunity to actually submit comments, because I thought it was particularly powerful, and I wondered what response you got to that.
So we actually didn't do any follow-up after submitting our statement. So we submitted this I guess it was called an application at the time to be able to participate, and were denied. We've not yet done any follow-up since then. However, basically what we said though to that panel was pretty much what I laid out here, that it's false. That the U.S. position is false, that they're fighting this on behalf of U.S. farmers, because this is a great opportunity for U.S. farmers, and it's really these chemical companies who would benefit. And so yeah, that's really been our message, and we continue to raise that.
No, thank you so much. It's such an important message. When the first decree came out, I wrote an analysis of a crazy, exaggerated set of studies by the industry saying that Mexico's decree would bankrupt everybody and everyone would starve. And they just want to put out alarmist messages like that. But Ken and you and others have just reiterated that this is a market opportunity, and that in fact, all of the alarmist reports and news are an attempt to prevent that market from developing. Because, as you say, it's not US farmers who would lose. They can switch crops. It's biotech companies who would lose. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you, Tim.
Final speaker today is Josefina Rosas. She is the production area manager from the Asociación Nacional de Empresas Comercializadoras de Productores del Campo, known as ANEC. That's a national farmers organization in Mexico, a longtime partner of IATP's, that has more than 100 farmer and indigenous organizations, representing more than 50,000 small and medium scale producers in 12 states in Mexico, mostly producing staple foods for the Mexican market. Josefina is an agricultural engineer, specialist in agroecology and weed management. And on behalf of ANEC, as a member of the national campaign, Without Corn, There Is No Country, Sin Maíz No Hay País, and the Parliamentary Front Against Hunger, among others. Josefina will be speaking in Spanish, so make sure you have your interpretation selected for English if you need interpretation. Josefina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to participate and to make our voice heard about what's happening in this trade dispute. For Mexico, it's crucial to ban the planting and use for human consumption of GMO corn. In Mexico, land tenure is really the pillar of campesina struggles. And obviously, we had the Mexican Revolution in 1910 to 1921, and from 1934 to 92, the agrarian reform took place. Currently, half the national territory is in the hands of campesina communities in the form of ejidos and communities. And more than 25% of our population lives in rural areas. So our identity is shaped by living in rural areas. Of 200 million hectares, 100 million hectares is in a category of land tenure called social property, which means that in half the country, traditional agricultural practices and culture and gastronomy and community organizations and life is taking place. So what is the socio-cultural impact of corn in our countries? Well, Mexicans are made of corn, and everything that we do is organized around growing corn. A great part of our life is focused on growing corn, and we use corn for not just eating, but also producing arts and crafts. In the central part of the country and in the southern eastern part is where the concentration of corn growers are found. And most of that corn is grown by campesinos that have less than 5 hectares. But they also grow other crops. This is a crucial statistic. We have over 40 varieties of native corn, which is grown above sea level. So we have a vast biodiversity and vast variety of genetic resources related to corn. So we produce 27 million tons of corn a year. Of that, 20 million of tons are grown in the spring-summer cycle. And so that's grown by small producers, and 7 million tons is grown during the fall and the winter. So white corn is grown on a small scale by small scale producers known as campesinos. So 88% of the corn grown is white corn and 12% is yellow corn. For human consumption, I believe it was 70% of the corn crop is for human consumption. So what is the impact of USMCA on our food systems and agricultural systems? So we produce 59% of the corn that we need, and we import 41%. So if you look at these graphics, you can see that the imports are growing each year. And we also have a graph of the price of corn in the international market. Price of our corn is linked to the Chicago Exchange. So you can see the volatility of the price of corn and how it's going up. So the small producers have to feed the Mexican people and are not duly compensated and paid for doing so. So we see that in the Chicago Exchange, corn is just a commodity to speculate with. It's not something to eat. There are 68 indigenous peoples who are part of the campesinos who grow this corn. So what's happening currently in our country is that we are opposing GM crops, and we are living a revolution in favor of agroecology and self-sufficiency. The world is suffering because of the environmental degradation. And so as an association, ANEC has decided to participate in this great transition along with 2.3 million other producers to create well-being and health for our people. And 114,000 small producers have been trained, and 85,000 are participating in a diversity of processes to contribute to this agroecological transition. So just because these are small farmers doing agroecology does not mean that they don't empower themselves with the rigor of science and research. Now, we're also transitioning away from the use of glyphosate and developing alternatives. And control the growth of our crops better. So in our organization at ANEC, there are 3,000 producers who are organized, who are participating in what they're calling bio factories in 12 states of the Republic on 7,000 hectares. So we know that our native corn is an amazing and marvelous being that has resisted the onslaught of toxins and other silly and wrong approaches. So we are also focusing on building up the soil and improving its fertility. Obviously, not using GMOs and not using toxic pesticides helps the soil to recover and supports the health and well-being of microorganisms in the soil. Mexico, of course, is the center of origin and diversification of corn. So even though there is a lot of land that is used to plant hybrid seeds, much of the country is planted with native corns and all their beautiful colors. So
Josefina, you could try to wrap up. That would be helpful.
So I just wanted to say that ANEC was able to submit its opinion to the panel in the trade dispute, and that was very important for the communities that we represent to make sure that their voices were heard, because we don't have just a relationship and a profound rapport with the earth, but also with other people. And obviously, we have a right to share our opinion on the future of corn and how it's grown. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Josefina. ANEC, the opinion ANEC submitted was tremendous and very important for the panel to hear in the absence of other voices from farmers, which were they declined to invite. The work that ANEC has done has really pioneered the agroecology movement in Mexico in a way that allowed that really became the basis for some of the current government initiatives in promoting agroecology. So thank you so much for joining us. We now want to move to question answer for about 15 minutes. Again, please submit questions in the Q&A section. I will direct them to the panelists, and I see we have a few very good substantive questions here. Fernando Bejarano asks directing the question to Ken about the price difference between the export price of non-GM corn and GM corn and how the price is established. Ken, do you want to take that briefly?
Sure. Yeah, the corn price is based in the U.S. is based on the Chicago Board of Trade. And according to the latest report, which I've seen, shows commodity corn prices this month are going for $4.47 per bushel. That's just for commodity. That would be GMO corn. And I mentioned earlier the prices for the white corn going for 30 cents to $1 per bushel above the commodity price, and the same and with the non-GMO feed corn, it's going from 20 cents to 30 cents per bushel above the commodity corn price of $4.47 per bushel. So that commodity corn price will vary per month. Just looking ahead, it looks like the price will be going up as we get into the summer and into the fall. For example, in July, the commodity corn price will go up to $4.60 per bushel. So it varies, and I would think the export cost to Mexico would be the same for non-GMO and GMO corn, the transportation costs, because the U.S. is close to Mexico, they're our southern neighbor. The cost wouldn't be as high. The transportation costs wouldn't be as high as if we had to ship, by ocean line or something like that. We can ship to Mexico by rail car or trucks. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you, Ken. Yeah, no, it's important to remember in the context of Angela's reminder that this is a huge there's a benefit out there for U.S. farmers who switch, that the commodity price of corn has been going down significantly over the last year and is now well below the cost of production on average. So there's a real need for that premium price. Following on that, Jim Goodman asks whether the trade agreement restricts U.S. farmers' right to grow non-GM white corn at a profitable price, because the agreement furthers the production of generic commodity corn, whether it's white or feed grain corn. So again, only the multinationals benefit. I don't know if Angela or Ken might want to respond to that.
So I would agree that the U.S.-Mexico agreement advanced the interests of the large seed and chemical companies, adding several provisions that protect biotech and GM production. They do provide a non-tariff market, whereby the agreement does provide some market opportunity for America's non-GM corn producers, but the U.S. continues to elevate the interests of the transnational agrochemical corporations.
Yeah, and I would add at the seed level, getting non-GMO corn seed can be challenging these days because the biotech companies have phased out, for the most part, their non-GMO varieties, except for Pioneer, I believe. So in some cases it's hard for farmers to find good non-GMO varieties. There's smaller companies that have emerged that are helping to supply that market, but can be a challenge for farmers.
Oh, thank you. We had a question from Manuel Gonzalez Ortega, a specialist in Mexico. We're pleased to have him on this. And he's asking, I'm going to shorten the question somewhat as I translate it, but how you see can the new biotechnologies such as CRISPR and Cas and other forms of genetic editing, and whether that's going to make it more difficult to assure to test for the presence of GMOs in production.
Yeah, it will be. There's been a GMO test developed for one gene edited trait, but yeah, those tests still need to be developed. So it's a real challenge to test for some of these GMO traits. There's tests available now for the GMO traits that are on the market, Roundup Ready and the BT traits, all but for the new gene edited traits, yeah, there aren't tests available. I know there's a lab that's working on those, and the fact that those traits aren't being regulated by the USDA or the FDA either. So that's another challenge.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you. We had actually two questions that I'll sort of combine about pesticide use. One from Antonio Tovar, who asked about the health impacts of switching to non-GM corn, particularly for farmers dealing with pesticides. He asks about pesticide use reduction, and Taylor Hodge asks if chemical fertilizers are part of the fight to get chemicals out of agriculture. And I think Josefina spoke about the extensive effort in Mexico to get biofertilizers and biopesticides available. Josefina, do you want to say more about that?
I just like to say that the impacts on human health have been huge. The documentation is increasing. We just passed the law for healthy food because there's so much toxic chemicals and toxic herbicides and pesticides are being used in rural areas, and that's harmful not just for campesinos y campesinas, but obviously for those who eat the food as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I know that there was an effort last year in Mexico to pass a health law that would have dramatically restricted the use of highly toxic pesticides, and that was very heavily lobbied against by industry and delayed. But I think the hope is that when the new government comes in, that there will be a renewed effort to get a health law passed that will restrict more than just glyphosate, but other toxic pesticides as well. We are about out of time. I'm sorry not to get to all of the questions, but we don't want to go over our time limit for our speakers' convenience. I did want to get closing remarks, just short remarks from each of the speakers on the main messages you'd want people to go away with. Can we start with Angela?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess my overall message here is that the US government is promoting the economic interests of global seed and chemical companies here. They're ignoring a premium market opportunity for non-GM corn that presents to US farmers. It's shameful. Our government, our USDA is supposed to represent farmers. Our government's supposed to represent our people. Let Mexico's government do the same and let them make their own decisions. The US must reverse course here and support America's farmers in meeting this premium market opportunity.
Thank you so much. Ken?
Yeah, I just want to kind of back what Angela just said, that Mexico wants non-GMO corn. They want to transition to agroecology, and they want to preserve the genetic integrity of their native corn genetics, which are very precious. I mean, Mexico is the center of corn diversity. And who is the U.S. to tell them they can't do it? The U.S. is being imperialistic. The trade groups, the commodity groups, and large corporations are trying to ram GMO corn down Mexico's throats, and they don't want it, and it's their right to refuse it. Unfortunately, there are grain suppliers, seed companies, and farmers in the U.S. would be happy to help Mexico ensure their foods are made using non-GMO corn, and that opportunity should be realized.
Thank you, Ken. Josefina.
As a country and as a people, we have the right to defend a crop that gives us our identity and our culture and our food. And we know that not just in Mexico, but worldwide, biodiversity is under attack. So it's not acceptable that they continue to invade us with genetically modified corn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josefina, and thanks to all our panelists. I'd also like to thank, we all thank Cassandra Smithies, who was interpreting for us today so ably, and our co-sponsors of this webinar series, Friends of the Earth, Semillas de Vida, Farm Action, Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, and ANEC. If there are any journalists on this call who want more time with any of the panelists, please let us know that. We're sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions here. A recording will be shared with everyone who was in attendance today. And let me just close by saying that where we are in the dispute is we expect a decision by the panel. They'll be considering, there'll be a hearing at the end of June that will be, we think, public, but not with outside speakers invited to testify. And then the panel will issue an initial finding in September and a final ruling in November. It is very important that, as Angela said, that our legislators in the United States hear from people in the United States that we do not support this, that we don't think it is in farmers' interests, and we don't think it is in the U.S. interests. And it is, we have no right to tell Mexico that they can't eat clean, healthy tortillas. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your attendance.